Hi, Dan Paulson here. This should be a pretty fun video on monomyth analysis, the template. I've been working at that for a long time, and I'm going to put a lot into this video to kind of try to help set things up and have it so that it's kind of a standalone. But I want to forewarn you, there's a lot of parts to this. There is a template that I can see that exists throughout antiquity, this monomyth template, and there's some other additional pieces floating around out there too that I'm looking at identifying. But I think that they're viewable. I think anybody, if you look at them and you figure them out, at some point, anybody that has the right kind of mind should go, yeah, I see the exact same thing. I shouldn't be coming up with something all on my own. This is something that the right people should be able to, the stories were structured in a certain way on that template. We should be able to find that template. And I believe that there is an exacting procedure that they used, but this is a long time ago. We have to cover a lot to get there. So I want to forewarn you, if you want to know what this is about and you got 20 minutes or so, you're not going to get it. There is a lot to this. It is deep. Welcome aboard. Let's get started. The Babylonian creation myth, the Enuma Elish, is not only the precursor to Genesis, but if you interpret it in a certain way, what it illustrates is that this is the first immersion of what we begin to see as the monomyth. A template that Joseph Campbell spotted and talked about in his book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces, covers that. He looked through antiquity, myth, religions, he saw some repeating patterns. And those of us who look at a lot of material, we see those patterns. You can go find sites on this. People are looking at, did Genesis come from Homer and the Odyssey? There's a lot of things you look at and go, there's so many similarities here. It's the pattern. It's the template. I found it. But I'm going to tell you something. You don't find it in academia. I do want to comment on the authority then for interpretation. And all I can say is this, is that in the world, in my experience, there is no shortage of people that tell you what to believe, what to think, and what to see, and what things are, without being able to show it to you. There's a point in this material, it doesn't go that way. It doesn't work like that. You look at it, you decide whether you want to interact with it mentally or not. You can either carry it, you can dismiss it completely, or you can find the template and go, yeah, I see what's there, and I see how to extract that. And there's so many of them that there's people back there that know about this, and they're just creating stories on it. So it's not beyond us to do this. We're just busy when they had a lot of time. The authority in the material comes in when the individual and the material match, and it works for you. I don't claim any authority. I found a path in the material. That's all I'm showing. What I have is discoverable for the person who is seeking inner peace. That is what is in here. And only through that interpretation process does it emerge as to what it really is. They're not just copying from each other. They're all sharing the same template. With one variation, in the beginning of Genesis, I'm struggling because I have identified one template that emerges that Joseph Campbell did not identify. It's a very short template right in the beginning, and it's called creation. If you go through the creation myth, well, let's just go through creation. The very first calling of the monomyth in Genesis is when Noah gets called. Noah is the first calling. Everybody after that in the stories, in the network of monomyth biblical stories, who is called and chosen by God. Right there is the calling. That starts the monomyth. Look through what's going on there. Interpreting is difficult. People listen to me and say, buddy, you don't know what you're talking about. Those are not the same. And I need to make it clear that this is a conceptual interpretation process. Let me explain how it's going to work. Everything plays out in the psyche. The eminent psychologist C.G. Jung told us that who looks outward dreams, who looks inward awakens. Lao Tzu tells us that it takes strength to defeat somebody, but only the mighty can defeat themselves, turning inward. We can kind of see this in action today, actually. People that are acting out very strong that can't turn inward and defeat their own inner enemies. You see why it doesn't get taught in school? Who knows that? So a question I get a lot is, then how do you know? And yeah, that's so here's what I want to say is that you find this out. It's a mental process. You look at the patterns, you start picking it apart. And actually what I did is just apply a mental experimentation, thought experiments, looking at this. And first of all, it started off emerging from short verse. And let's take a look at a couple of examples. Let's wrap a couple things up in here. I'm going to show you how it plays out in the psyche and also how the variations come about that we don't recognize in different material. You can go read Hinduism. It doesn't sound like Judaism, does it? It doesn't sound like Greek mythology. However, they're all built on the same template. Wow. Yeah. You can read all of those in the same way to extract that template using this one procedure. Thought experiments is what got me there. And, to be honest, to think how this started, it must have been 20, 25, 30 years ago or something. I'm reading different things and I go, wow, Buddha, karma, law of reciprocity. The way you treat others is the way you get treated. The measure you mete unto others is likewise meted unto you. Hey, isn't Jesus and Buddha teaching the same thing? That was the beginning right there. And now I'm like, oh yeah, they do. They exactly teach the same thing. Everything is a metaphor. It's not plain language. And it is carried in analogous terms that don't mean exactly what they mean. Since they play out in the psyche, they're using something in the world. Okay, let's throw a couple of examples on the table and see how that actually looks. I'm going to make some up. These are very short. And this is conceptually how all of it works. This is just very simple versions. We will find this simplicity in Jesus, Buddha, and Lao Tzu's work. Okay, some homemade verses. An anchored ship cannot sail. You cycle around that which you cling to. The tied dog cannot roam. Okay, at once you listen to those and go, whoa, what? The same. I don't see that. And you know what? Actually, I want to point out something right here. Actually, if you read any of those verses by itself, you would just go, that's a weird thing. But look at with all three of them sitting side by side. Did you notice in your own mind, you went, oh, wait a minute. I see a pattern there. That's what we're looking for. And you know what? Here you can get people's attention. That's why I don't grab, I make my own verses right up front so people are more open-minded to it. If you bring up religious verses right off the bat, people have got a bias to those, and they don't to this. So this is how we're going to approach it, though. These are all going to play out in the psyche. Every one of these is an analog for something. And in this case, in these simple verse, they're analog for us. We go to the anchored ship cannot sail. I am the ship, and I am holding on to something. This represents me holding on to something. But since we're turning it into the psyche, it does not represent holding on to something in the physical world. Relationships, dead-end jobs, things like that, which also happen. And sometimes people only go that far with the material because it can work up to that point. And they go, yeah, this is what it means. The seeker knows that that's not far enough. You turn it all the way into the psyche, and what you're hanging on to is pain, shame, hurt, commitments, judgments. Something in life has happened that we are now attached to the world, emotionally, to things going on. And the stuff that we cling to that we can't let go of are going to keep coming up again and again and again. So this is a conceptual interpretation where we become the component part and it's playing out in some kind of a role in our life, in our psyche, in the parts that are up here. What if we go to the next one? You cycle around that which you cling to. Yeah, bingo, there we go. We're hanging on to it in the same way. It's different analogs holding the same concept. What about our dog? The tied dog cannot roam. I am the dog. I cannot roam. If I'm tied to something, I can't roam. Conceptually, they are instantly the exact same thing that if you don't know how to read them are going to sound like, mine's better. Yours is not. You are wrong. So it works in the human psyche in a number of ways. But if you make that last transition, you see that you go, oh, by golly, I see what they're doing. It's a word game. It's a puzzle. How do we change genre? Let's go from an anchored ship cannot sail to an anchored ship cannot sail, saith the Lord. Bingo. We just put it in a different ark, a different carrier shell. How about this one? And the Lord God spoke and commanded unto them, you will be destined to cycle around that which you cling to. And what you don't know is that I'm maintaining a hierarchy in these, perhaps. That'll come about later. It's another layer. The Lord God is not just thrown in there to pretend. It is actually... everything in here is analogous to something in the psyche. You don't leave any of it out. So that's another part of the interpretation. How you do it is that everything is analogous, even if it doesn't sound like it's analogous. Somebody could say you need to fast as to the world. And literally that would mean that you should take a day where you don't eat. And that's practiced all around the world. Fasting is a practice. And it's healthy, it's good, it's all that. There's good reasons to fast. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. But in the spiritual world or in the psyche, when you're fasting, you're consuming, it's your mind up here that you're working with. So if you're fasting, that means letting everything go, disconnecting, turning off media, getting away from everything. You are fasting as to the world spiritually, not just physically. You can eat bad stuff or good stuff in the physical world, bad stuff or good stuff in the spiritual world. That directly relates. That analog is like, perfect. What happens with nakedness? That's an analog that's used quite a bit. That's a backwards one because we think of that as, we don't want to be naked. We need to cover up. So we read the Bible and we go, we better cover things up. In the spiritual world, you don't want to be covered. We got the stories written in such a way that it floats it in the public in a different way that we must interpret it from. We don't look at it as if it's a physical thing. We look at it as if it's a spiritual thing, and nakedness is preferred. That means we are not covering up our pain, our shame, our hurt. We got those things inside of us that are there that are hurting us and affecting our life. And that is part of the template that this is based upon. It's a self-healing template. Okay, let's take a quick look at the monomyth itself. The call to adventure. Okay, what we have is this is the Joseph Campbell identified monomyth, and what this does is it plays out in the psyche. This is what all of the stories from antiquity are written on. This is what he spotted, this template. That's why he used these terms that he did. The call to adventure, the refusal of the call, supernatural aid, crossing the first threshold. You know what these really are is a call to adventure is I've decided I'm going to turn inward and take a trip, a journey, and resolve my past because I'm carrying pain with me. The refusal of the call, I don't want to do it. It's not okay. It doesn't feel good. Supernatural aid is not supernatural. There is nothing supernatural in the psyche. This is all getting knowledge and information of how your higher being works with your conscious and your stored away pain, the things that we don't want to look at, how to start looking at it, how to become the kind of person that turns to them, faces them, emerges them, begins to look at them, which causes the healing to all happen. So we learn all of that stuff. Elements like that would be evident in, like, for example, Jason and the Argonauts in the original story. As a youth, he's sent off with to go learn from a spiritual master. And he gets supernatural aid in that way. But he also gets taken up to the gods, up to visit the gods. Moses in Genesis, he goes up the burning bush, the Ten Commandments. Yeah, he gets his supernatural aid too. Crossing of the first threshold, that is turning inward. This is the point right here, crossing that first threshold. That is where in Jesus' work it's going to say, many are standing outside the narrow gate where only the solitary will enter. There's going to be very few people that do this right here, that turn it inward. Belly of the whale, that is in your psyche. Road of trials is the difficulty you're going to have to go through. Meeting with the goddess, that's reattaching with your psyche. In the stories, the way these are going to play out, we start out as Adam and Eve naked in the Garden of Eden. This is our little kid stage. We're not hurt from life yet. We're happy and blissful, but ignorant as well. We begin experiencing life. That goes on. It continues to build. The things that we do later. I mean, just watch people that are sitting there watching certain kind of media or something like that constantly. They become that. We become what we consume. You got to turn all the crap off and get away from things in order to clear up life. I mean, select. At any rate, that's what's happening down here. We have had all that happen. We're getting rid of that stuff. We're trying to get away from that. The atonement with the Father. There's the change happens. We have difficulty coming back. This is basically the monomyth, and that is what we're looking at. However, in the Enuma Elish, it's going to be a precursor. It isn't exactly like this. You can see that it has all the elements in there, but it wasn't completely structured in this way. It is older, but when we get to the Bible, it's very much this way. We will see it pretty much like this. There are variations to this monomyth we will go through. In front of the monomyth, from the two creation stories up to the calling of Noah, is another myth that was not identified. That's that creation myth. And there's a part of the creation myth in Genesis that I'm struggling with understanding. So the purpose of coming back through here is to go through it again in the best way that I can to interpret this material and try to, when I get to that point of the template where something is there in Genesis that I don't understand what it is, to see if that same thing is here in the Enuma Elish when I get to that point. But I want to go through it all just to show everybody what I'm doing and how I'm doing it and what I have discovered. I think it's accurate because no matter what material you go to, it shows up. Watch. First, I'm going to read just a little bit from the Tao Te Ching from Lao Tzu. It's a Chinese material approximately 500 years before Jesus. And I'm just right on page 1, the first verse, right on number 1. And I'm just going to call your attention to this. There's a lot going on this page, so I don't want to cover it all. I've got to get through this video. Naming is the origin of all particular things. Now, right up above, what they have is the Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. This is their version. If we interpreted it through, again, I'm not going to do that here, but this is their version of you come from nothing. This is creation story without the need to make it sound like it was like you created by a god. This is just telling you that you come from the cosmos. There is nothing in it, and that nothingness is what you really want. That's the eternally real. Naming is the origin of all particular things is what I want to draw your attention to, because that is us right there. That is us deciding at some point in time, ooh, I like that, I don't like that. That is us becoming conscious enough to begin judging life. Naming is the origin of all particular things that in our world, in our life, in our world experience, once we begin classifying them with an emotional state and a memory, that is who we start becoming. It goes on to say, free from desire, you realize the mystery. Caught in desire, you see only the manifestations. Again, all of these are analogs that are playing out in the psyche. This is going to sound unfamiliar to people if you haven't read it quite a bit, but it's doing the same thing. Free from desire, free from clinging, that the whole lead up to it. You cycle around that which you cling to. Free from that, you realize the mystery. You're free, caught in that desire, hanging on to it. You see only the manifestation. You see the continuation of that cycle. Do you see that right there? Okay, look at this one. It may be a little more familiar to some, the Buddha from the Dhammapada, also about 500 years before Jesus, and roughly contemporaneous with the Chinese work from the Tao Te Ching from Lao Tzu, and from Tibet. I don't know if you can tell. This is verse 1, 2, 3, and 4. This is right in the beginning. This is the first part of the Dhammapada, the very first teachings. All that we are is the result of what we have thought. It is founded on our thoughts. It is made up of our thoughts. So this is telling us right here that we are the result of mental activity. If a man speaks or acts with an evil thought, pain follows him as the wheel follows the foot of the ox that draws the carriage. This is hanging on to something and it's coming around over, you're cycling around it. If a man speaks or acts with an evil thought, there's something inside of us that is not okay. It's tucked away, but it continues to emerge. We get triggered and it follows us like the wheel follows the foot of the ox that draws the carriage. The carriage is what we are drawing in life. We are the ox. We're the ox, the carriage, that whole package right there. So those are analogs for who and what we are. And then the action there is what is going on. We see the cyclical, the pain following the wheel. The very next verse goes on to say we are the result of what we have thought again. Again, it's mental. However, the variation here is if a man speaks or acts with a pure thought, happiness follows him like a shadow that never leaves him. So this is like when we're naming things, when we are deciding things, when we're classifying things. Once we have had issues that happen in our mind that are not resolved, they continue to emerge. This is the same thing. It's coming about in the same way. We emerge from our thinking processes, and they're going to continue to act out in the way that they do. I don't know how much detail to add in. I went back and put this in. I think this is important because I used to, when I hear somebody say something like we are a product of our thoughts, I would think, no, I'm a product of my experiences. You don't know what my childhood was like. It was not my thinking that made me. It was my life. And that's exactly how we think, because that's how we experience it when we're experiencing it physically. If we can step outside of that, though, and look at it from our higher being, what we are becoming is a product of the way we mentally process those experiences and store them away into our subconscious. As they get put away as our memories, that's what we begin to live through. Therefore, even though it is a physical experience that is happening, that physical experience through our conscious perception is what we're wiring ourselves with, unbeknownst to us. Okay. However, if we don't have any, the pure thought, the empty mind, the not connection to things, then happiness, we're not connected to stuff. We're not all wrapped up in life. What is the next one? It gets a little more detail. He abused me. He beat me. He defeated me. He robbed me. And those who harbor such thoughts, hatred will never cease. So this is letting us know that it's the bad, negative stuff that is. And the verses are showing duality here as well. It's telling us if you do it bad, then this will happen. If you do it good, then that'll happen. If this, then that. Anyway, so there's duality being shown in the way that those verses are being written. He abused me, he beat me, he defeated me, he robbed me, and those who do not harbor such thoughts, hatred will cease. You let it go, you purify. We become products of our mental thinking processes. Do you see the same thing here? All right, watch one more. This time I'm jumping over to the very familiar Bible, to Luke 6:20. And then he looked at his disciples and said, "Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God." You may recognize this as what would be called in some circles the Sermon on the Plain. It's basically just another teaching. It's a variant of the Sermon on the Mount. This is Jesus' version of the compact teachings that we would find in Lao Tzu or Buddha's work, the Dhammapada or the Tao Te Ching. Jesus has a similar grouping. They do the same thing, exactly the same thing. Take a look at this. Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. They play out in the psyche, 100%, never any other way. When we don't do that, we don't get it right. We will hear in Matthew the version that's blessed are you who are poor in spirit. So there's a variant there. Here's what we need to know. Every one of these plays out in the psyche. Is it a spiritual document? Is it a spiritual teaching? Yes. Then it's not about the physical world, even if it sounds like the verse might be something you're supposed to settle with in the physical world. When you interpret it in the psyche, it doesn't go out there. This doesn't mean poor. This means poor in spirit. But what is poor? Poor. We want to be empty. We've named things. We are not devoid. We want our minds to be clear. Spirit. I'm taking liberties here. What is spirit? People think spirit is like this, some sort of energy entity that goes on and something somehow. How do you purify a spirit? How do you heal a spirit? How do you interact with a spirit? We don't start out hurt. We end up hurt. What happened to us along the way? Am I evil? Am I bad? What happened to me? What the hell? It's mental. When you're not consciously paying attention, you're on autopilot. There's your spirit right there. If it's 3,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago. So what do we interact with? We interact with what we know we can interact with, our memories, which affect the way we feel, which affects the way our life is. What we have going on here in Jesus' teaching, blessed are the poor. Remember in Lao Tzu's work, once you start naming things, that's the origin. Once in Buddha's work, if we have an evil thought, it continues to follow us. Here he's telling us to be poor in spirit, to not have that stuff, and then we'll be happy. Conceptually, they are all doing the exact same thing. It's not just karma and the measure you meet. It's everything. In fact, in Lao Tzu's work, it's the Tao, the way that we flow in life that we're affecting as we name things. What did Buddha have? We exist in a shadow that never leaves us of happiness. In Jesus' work, it's the kingdom of God. All of them are conceptually a state of being. We just have to know how to interpret it. Every bit of it is an analog. Every bit of it plays out in the psyche. There are some exceptions. There are transitions. It may not be in your psyche. It might be about your world. Part of the path is that you are interacting with other people and you're having to make changes in your life because you're coming from a bad place to a good place. You're working out issues that you have with people, things like that. So not all of it is just about you. It can be about the things in your world that affect you. But if interpretation takes us beyond that, then we've lost it. It doesn't go beyond us. Whatever we're interpreting is only our local experience and inward. Not anyone else's. That's judgment. That's outward looking. Okay. What then am I talking about? Because the Enuma Elish is not short verse like that. The thing is that it's going to be it's going to be done in the same way, but it has a lot of complexity to it. It's very necessary to initially build up that mental framework, establishing how they're doing this. The short verse is that way. Then you take that concept and build it big. You're in a storytelling culture that doesn't read, doesn't write. It is their media. They're growing, they're developing. There's a lot of people, perhaps tens of thousands, doing what? Going to work, staring at the walls, hanging around at night. Well, I don't know what their life is like, but this is their media. The stories are important. So the template is going to stay simple. It's a self-healing template, but the stories are going to get huge because that's where it's important, in the population. You want the story to go, but you also want to provide something for the people in the story. So the template is there, but the story itself is also intended to help guide a growing population in some way. And that's what we see in all religious material. The template is there, and then some analogous guidance package, an arc to carry it in. So how does that work, though, with such a big story? The easiest thing for me to do here is to cut to the chase. It's going to sound weird, but it'll come together in the end. Eventually, what emerges is that there are 5 components that we're going to be working with mentally when we turn inward. There's going to be a higher being, a consciousness, a subconscious, all of the things that we're holding within the subconscious. And then there is a unified field that we all exist within, and we flow our life experiences through that field. And our life experience through that field is based on the quality of the experiences that we have stored up here, and that we started out in life without that up here, but we became a product of this, and it's mental, and that we can use mental processes to extract ourselves from it. That is what is going to emerge from here. There's 5 parts that we're working with, and everything fits there. Primarily, everything is going to be in the 4 mental regions. The God, the higher self, everything that emerges from there, sky, thoughts, earth, myself, my physical world experience, the things that I interact with, seas, my subconscious, my soul, all of those are there as analogous portions, as well as the female parts, the offspring. The offspring are the things that you've stored away. I've got something that acts out because I don't have something resolved. That's a bad offspring right there. Or a demon, or a weed in the garden. You see, all of them are analogs carrying the same concept. It's just that simple. Once you transition it inward, it all comes online. And you may have noticed, but I'll point out just to make sure that there's a hierarchy in there. In the stories as they're emerging, as whoever is called is the consciousness. It's not just me as the individual. It is my conscious self who has decided I've had it. My subconscious doesn't make that decision. My higher self doesn't make that decision. It's me, myself, who goes, I cannot live this life anymore. The consciousness is the person who goes. The consciousness has to work with the higher being. The higher being is the one that's detached from it, going, yeah, don't look at it that way. You let it emerge. Let it come out of you. While the conscious is the emotional experiencing creature that's sitting there denying it, going, oh my God, no, I don't want to. So the conscious is the issue. The subconscious, female, that's the part of us that is holding, retaining all of the memories, the stored memories and their emotional states that we're building into this bundle, this dark bundle of something we don't want to deal with called life. That hurts. And we don't want to look at it because it hurts. So we put it away because it hurts. But at some point we realize, damn it, it's not staying away. It's coming out and causing more hurt. It continues to procreate. You have to interact with it. There's a cause and effect going on. There's something happening at a deeper level. We're turning inward and seeing that there's something nested in there. And it's a memory and the emotional state of that memory. And we have to change the emotional state of that memory. And through the stories, what's going to emerge is there's this idea that there are different parts of us. When you're young, you are one thing. As you grow up and you become disconnected, or, our early self, our ego self, you're a different person. You're your bad self. You're going to turn into your good self later and go back. But also while you're your bad self, we started off with a lot of good qualities. Here we have like these offspring, these beautiful young daughters of something. This will emerge in the stories. You may be familiar with them. And that something comes in and interlopes with them. Has sex, and they have offspring, giants. What is happening is that our early self is becoming, these virgin youngsters was our young self, our honesty, our capacity to see things with wide open eyes, constantly open, not jaded. As time goes on, we lose those qualities to life, and those become so big that those are the monsters that we defeat. And at the end of the story, you will see that those monsters get trapped away and get rendered. You have to take their power away. They're put away somehow where they cannot act out, representing the idea that they're memories that are there, that you have to put them away, but you have to take away their power. We have to heal ourselves. It is nested in there that you look at and go, oh my God, they knew this. This is just incredible stuff. But all the people in the story then are different component parts there. 7 of these come down and do something. What are those 7 qualities, 7 characteristics or something? Those are parts of you. They're not something outside. They're not in the world. They're making the story bigger. Instead of saying, I need to heal myself, you're saying, I need to heal the part of myself that emerged at this point in time that had this quality and this characteristic. It's just adding more parts to the story to make it bigger. Make it more fun, make it more interesting. Media, complex media that also contained the spiritual, this is how life works. To understand the meaning of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. Nikola Tesla. This is it. Yeah, they saw things just worked this way. At any rate, yeah, so that's how the story's going to unfold. You look at it and go, how do all those parts fit inside of you? These are parts of you, various parts of you just being held in incredibly verbose ways. That's it. Okay. Does that make sense? Actually, before moving on, let me spring another recent realization from Genesis that fits right in with all of this. This shows how the multi-layering and the complexity comes about. So now we've talked about a number of things, including the hierarchy in the mind, the conscious, the subconscious. We can relate that to being in the Garden of Eden as children, naked and unashamed. We are self-aware, we're conscious, we're ready to start living life. But what happens when we sin? We are told that our pain in childbirth is going to increase. And what is that? This is our spiritually, this is our inner being. And every time we give offspring means that whatever is emerging from within us comes out, it's going to be painful. And it even says it's going to continue to increase. See how it works? Yeah, it's all there in the beginning. You got cyclical issues that are going to be coming after you. The stories start like this. One more thing, and this is not a part of the interpretation, but I think it's important because a lot of people hit you up with, those buildings were burned. Jericho was found. How these stories must be true. They're being created at that time on that template based on what they're doing in their culture. There are true elements to the story. They're created at that time for those people. Yeah, there's true elements in it, but they're made on the template. So what does that tell you? I hope that established everything that we're going to do to get into the stories now. This is going to emerge in a way that this is how the template works. And yeah, again, I'm looking for a step in here that I don't recognize. There's something in Genesis that pops up that I don't know where it comes from. I don't find it elsewhere. Okay, the first thing I want to do is bring up my modified copy of Genesis. All of it is here. I'm simply taking out the chapter breaks if they're not in the right place. What I'm doing is just breaking down each step in the story and getting rid of the verse lines and everything else and grouping them together in such a manner that it's easier to spot templates. It is not obscured in all of just this jumble going on. Okay, what I'm going to do is skip the first 2 in this explanation right here. This is the development of the human. I hope you're caught up with me so far. First sin 3, this is our experiential and developmental life in the world begins at this point. This is when we start losing our little kid status and start experiencing life, and we become connected to the physical world. We begin taking a mental stake in things, and we begin wiring ourselves from our experiences, something that we want to know because later we'd like to rectify that. Cain murders Abel. This is when we become divided as well as tied to the physical world. This is our earlier self, representing our earlier self. The beginnings of civilization is going to occur in this type of material as a template part that is going to be recognizable. You'll see this very easily. There's going to be a city, there's a structure being built, there's a development of other parts of ourselves, of who and what we are. These are going to become parts of the story, but they represent parts of who and what we are. Then as they're playing the pipe and doing things like that, this is going out and experiencing life, living life, getting job, going to work, taking trips, doing things. And as you gather things along the way, which are mental concepts and experiences, that you become that. When we get down here, there's Adam's descendants to Noah lineage that comes in that suddenly just makes me go, I don't know what this is. I don't recognize it from elsewhere. At the end of it is where it starts the wickedness of humankind. Our lives have become our hell. We're getting to a point where we're getting ready to want to go back in. We've woken up and said, oh my God, what can I do about my life? The monomyth calling is right there. So everything leading from the first one to creation down here to we got through our lineage, and the monomyth calling is all a template called creation. And I want to show you something up here. Do you see where this is highlighted purple? At the end of beginnings of civilization and Adam's descendants to Noah. Right down here, this line says, Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son and named him Seth. For she said, God has appointed for me another child instead of Abel, because Cain killed him. To Seth the son was also born, and he named him Enosh. At that time, people began to invoke the name of the Lord. To me, it sounds like it ends right there. Look what happens here. Then it goes into, this is kind of a strange jumble. The descendants things, why it announces it. It doesn't just jump into the descendants. This is the list of the descendants of Adam. When God created humankind, he made them in the likeness of God. Male and female, he created them, and he blessed them and named them humankind when they were created. We already knew this. Why are we doing this in the story? This is like writing a book and then telling about a character, and then another chapter later telling about the character again, and then telling about the character again. It doesn't. Everywhere else in the Bible it flows, but not right here. It doesn't to me. Look at it a little bit. Jump down here to the third line in this area that I think is weird. The next line. When Adam had lived 130 years, he became the father of a son in his likeness, according to his image, and named him Seth. Back up here, Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son and named him Seth. For she said, God has appointed for me another child instead of Abel, because Cain had killed him. They have announced Adam and Seth 2 times with some verbiage in between here. Then this whole goofy stuff starts right. You know what? It looks to me like this would end right here, honestly, that the people begin to invoke the name of the Lord. Then you jump this whole section and start off on wickedness of humankind. That if you took this entire section out, that would flow. That would flow just fine. I believe this was added in for some reason, and that this is, since this is not a flow like everything else. It just smoothly goes along and on. This is an overlap. This is an overlap of stories that they've put in. I believe this part right here was added in, but I want to understand it, and that's the difficult part. I got to find comparisons for it elsewhere. What is this section? And of course, I want to emphasize that every bit of this is playing out in the psyche. So I look at this and go, I don't know what this is establishing. It may not be part of an actual inner process. It might be part of a story network process. I don't know. I'm just throwing things out, ideas. I think it's always important for us to examine it tight like this and then sit back and go, okay, this is a long time ago. It's a story network much bigger than what we know. I think the Bible is downstream from a lot of Kabbalistic works that would have led into these numbers and explanations and things that we're seeing them show up here. The old Jewish masters would be laughing at us going, oh, you guys don't know what those are. We're trying to figure them out. But I don't, the only thing it could be doing is increasing lineage in us, creating more pieces and more parts for more story elements. Yeah, that's a creation of each individual's life. That is right there. That it is a creation story, but it's not what we think it is. Got to turn it inward. Okay. In fact, here, do a thought experiment of your own. Stand there and look at the world. Just, on your front porch or outside, sometime throughout the day, just look. See everything out there in the physical world. Look outward. Grab the material and interpret it and go out there into the world. It's going to lead you through supernatural and fantasy and non-demonstrable, the things that humans really prefer. Turning inward is not easy. The material is ready. When you are ready to turn inward, you grab the material and it turns inward too. This material and the human work the same way. They face outward or they face inward. Outward, many are called, few are chosen. And the narrow gate, very few are going to enter. Outward looking, the paths are many that lead to destruction. And my habit is to go all over the place with this. And the reason is because it continually shows the template. Sticking with one line of material, you can't see the template. When you start making comparisons, you go, okay, I see what's going on. How many of you have ever come through religious environments? I certainly did, where I was told quite vehemently, you don't read other stuff. You don't read Buddhists. You don't read anything. That's all evil stuff. Leave it alone. You're going to get influenced. What is that going to do? You're going to maintain ignorance. So I'll keep doing that. Anyway, back to what we were doing. Okay, I'm building this idea that it's all mental, that we got to turn it inward, that it plays out in a metaphor, that is carried in analogs, and that there's a template that is sequential. When we get to the Enuma Elish, it won't be structured in that way. It's going to be jumbled up a little bit more, so it's going to look a little bit different. But as we went through that, there's a point where we stopped just before the flood, that's when the first monomyth happens, the calling. Noah is the first calling. So this is happening before that point. So as we get into this, there's going to be a part as we get in, it'll emerge as we move along, but there's a point where we're going back to destroy King U and wipe out Tiamat. It's getting rid of the past. That is actually in the midst of what would be considered a flood. That's too far into it. This should occur somewhere before then, probably by tablet 3 or something like that. Anyway, I'm not certain, so let's go ahead and jump into it. I'm going to be using this copy right here. It's just one that I have on hand. There's some additions that have been put into it. The tablet itself did not survive completely. There were chunks missing from it. So depending on the translation, some just leave it blank. In this case, the person has a lot of knowledge about a lot of things, and I appreciate that they did put in some things. They're highlighted. We just have to know when we get to them to not treat them as if they are, as if they're original. They're placeholders. Before I start on tablet 1, I want to read some of the introduction. I'm not going to post it up there. I think the text is too small to see it. So I'll just read it. But, yeah, it covers a few things. Let's just talk about them on the way. But listen to this. The Babylonian creation story, known in ancient times by its opening words, Enuma Elish, meaning when the heavens above, is a concise presentation of Mesopotamian lore concerning the origins of the gods, the universe, and mankind. Although it is not certain just how far back the fundamental conceptions of this creation were first comprehended, they no doubt far precede this particular version of the Babylonian creation, which was uncovered as tablets from the ancient city of Nineveh, dating to the 7th century BC. Yet these tablets hold within them a composition which may have arisen towards the close of the 2nd millennium BC, made up of earlier material dating from the Bronze Age. Apart from its age and provenance, what is of interest in considering this creation myth and other Mesopotamian myths is the same which holds for any story that deals with essential human concerns which have remained unchanged through time and history. Thus, such myths dealing with the origins of humanity also emphasize basic human preoccupations, acting as a means to explain the origin of our collective existence. Likewise, they stretch back as far as we are capable of reaching in reviewing the earliest written works of humanity and containing beliefs, concerns, and the manner of life of men in the early phases of civilization. Yeah, they're putting population control in here. Likewise, their importance ranges wide based upon how far such seminal myths were shared among humanity with characters who infuse world mythology and which are still known to us today, even if under different names. Thus, while the characters of Apsu, Tiamat, and Marduk are not widely familiar in the modern world, some of these have found their way via other Near Eastern myths to become known to us specifically through the pages of the Bible. Most conspicuous among these is the name of Marduk, the great Babylonian sky god who appeared in the book of Esther as Mordecai, the Benjaminite, as also does the goddess Ishtar appear as Esther herself. The deity Apsu represents the watery abyss which was believed since before the Classic Age to underlie the earth, and this conception holds in references to the abyss, but the name of Tiamat is also retained within the Genesis chapter 1 word for deep, which is Tehom, also used in the book of Isaiah. Anyway, it'll go on. There's more to this, and people see this. People know it. People know there's myth. You will find in here fun things, though. I'm going to make a note of it right now as we go through these. You might see notes like on tablet number 1, we're going to come down here, and there's going to be something that says, compare with 2 Esdras 6:4, before the measures of the firmament were named. You will find notes in there, and when people are finding references like that and they're going, something's going on right there, those are where the template aligns. Those are template alignment points. So it's great that people find those and put them in there. Okay, starting right with the first tablet. I'm going to read a little bit and then we'll talk about this. This is going to be so accelerated compared to Genesis. So hold on to your hats. At a time when even the glories above had yet to be named, and unuttered was the word for the world which lay beneath, it was then that the first being Apsu, who was their source, and the progenitor Tiamat, the mother who gave birth to all, intermingled their waters, producing neither field nor marsh. At a time when no divine beings had yet come into existence, there were no names to be spoken and no fates pronounced. But the gods were given birth within those intermixing waves. The first were Lamu and Lahamu. Their names were spoken. All right, I'm just going to jump around with what I've already analyzed in the past. This Lamu and Lahamu down here, that's equal to Adam and Eve. Lamu and Lahamu, that's a male and female version of the same name. My name is Daniel. You could say Daniel and Danielle. That's my conscious and my subconscious, my male, my female side. So this is the first creation right here of there's a consciousness, an awareness of who and what we are. And if you look ahead of time, there's actually a couple of things going on. I don't want to spend too much time on it. The progenitor Tiamat, the mother who gave birth to all, that is going to be our it's an underself, it's a water self. It's really going to be our subconscious is what that is going to end up being, Tiamat. Intermingled their waters, producing neither field nor marsh. So at some point in time, we were not yet developed. This was prior to, if we go to Genesis, before the animals were made, before the plants were made and the seeds and all of that kind of stuff. This is saying neither field nor marsh. Those had not created yet. They had not come in. The divine beings, now the divine beings are going to be different here. Well, we'll move on to it. There were no names to be spoken and no fates pronounced. No fates, that is, we got nothing, we don't have anything stored away yet. We haven't decided upon anything. There is no fate for us. There were no names to be spoken and no fates pronounced. If we refer back to what we've already covered with Buddha and Lao Tzu, this is the same part right in the beginning of theirs where no names to be spoken here in Lao Tzu would be naming is the origin of all particular things. So we haven't done the naming yet. And no fates pronounced here would be that free from desire, you realize the mystery. Remember, caught in desire, you realize the manifestation. So we're free from desire here. That hasn't happened yet. No names were spoken. There's nothing emerging yet. Buddha's right in the beginning, too, in the twin verses, that all we are is the result of what we have thought. And if a man has acted with a pure thought, then happiness follows him like a shadow that never leaves. Jesus has the same one, remember, in the poor in spirit. If we're poor in spirit, we have nothing in there and nothing is emerging as a result. We're at the same place right there. Right in the beginning, we're establishing this condition for our existence, our mental, and that's it, our mental existence. There were no names to be spoken and no fates pronounced, so we were not living in the experience of that yet. We are naked and in the garden, essentially. But the gods were given birth within those intermingling waves, and then we come about. So here we are emergent. There we are. That would be equivalent to the end of the creation story where we are naked in the garden. Okay, let's move on from those two and see where we end up next. The first were Lamu and Lahamu. Their names were spoken. But once they had fully grown and become mature of form, then there were born Anshar and Kishar, and they outshone them. And so many days passed by, and many years were counted. Their first son was Anu, being as great as any of his forebears, and Anshar caused his son Anu to become just like himself. From Anu came Nudimmud, who was also his spitting image, and Nudimmud proved to be even greater than his forebears, profoundly wise and full of insight, with strength in his limbs, more infused with might than even his grandfather Anshar. I've got some early videos up on interpreting these at a much more specific level. I'm not looking to really hammer this one in the analog section. I'm looking for those big chunks of it. So what they're doing right here, though, is building up other parts of us that are going to come about later. You know, you start out as one thing, you emerge into another. It's a little bit different style. It's really a lot of steps along the way. And it's right now is what they're creating that. What is this aligned to? What does this look like right here? This is actually, or I'm going to step back to Genesis here. Let me step back a little bit here. Right at the beginning, we had creation. We got two creation stories here in Genesis. We just had that short one there up front. In Genesis, they're establishing a lot of things that we're going to be using. And that's going to come about in the Enuma Elish as we move along instead of right here in one big chunk. They're different. They're going to have everything, but they don't look the same if you don't read them a certain way. Okay, first sin, we haven't had that happen yet, have we? Cain murders Abel? No, we're not divided yet. Beginnings of civilization. Boom, there we go. Going forth and multiplying, experiencing and connecting to our initial physical life, we become... So that's actually not what's happening. What we're doing is we're just splitting up. The wickedness of humankind. Yeah, that's there. It's going to be in this section right here that's happening. This is either beginnings of civilization or Adam's descendants to Noah. That is going to be somehow aligning with that. Let me go back and read it again. The first were Lamu and Lahamu. Their names were spoken. But once they had fully grown and become mature of form, then were born Anshar and Kishar. So this is the decay of us. We start off pure, now we're starting to become something different. And they outshone them. Yeah, the next part is going to be stronger than the older part. Outshine is an analog. It doesn't necessarily mean brighter, yea, happier. It means more powerful. It could swing either direction. And so many days passed by and many years were counted. So time is going by. Go forth and multiply. The first son was Anu, being as great as any of his forebears. And Anshar caused his son Anu to become just like himself. And Anu became Nudimmud, who was also his spitting image. And Nudimmud proved to be even greater than his forebears, profoundly wise and full of insight, with strength in his limbs, more infused with might than even his grandfather Anshar. All this is doing is building lineage, period. Yeah, there's nothing else I see in that right now. So let's go ahead. Everybody with me so far? You see those chunks, how things are moving around. Let me keep moving along, and it hopefully will become more evident. It's not going to get all finished in this video. It might take a couple of them. All right, let's transition on the tablet into page 2 here. We left off on page 1, and Nudimmud proved to be even greater than his forebears, profoundly wise and full of insight, with strength in his limbs, more infused with might than even his grandfather Anshar. This is your after yourself getting stronger and stronger than your earlier self. You're becoming offspring of your earlier being, with none among the gods who could be considered his equal. That generation of gods would gather together for wild revels, so they proved bothersome to Tiamat. Their hullabaloo echoed. Okay, I'm going to stop for a minute and talk about gods. They are using gods here as our characteristics. In other material, it's going to be like fallen angels or evil things or something like that. But in this case, what it is gods. And the reason they're calling them gods in the beginning, the reason it's going to emerge as gods is because they're so powerful that they're going to take control. We need to give this a little bit of attention. I think that we all have qualities and characteristics. Our joys, our pain, our hurt, our love, our desires, all of those things. And when we're young, we're very innocent and we don't suffer any feelings. But as we begin to connect to the world and begin to observe things and begin to process our world experiences, regardless of what it is. It might be good, it might be bad, but we become products of those experiences. And that the gods are going to be like temptations. What do I do that I shouldn't be doing? And maybe early in life, you don't even care. You don't even think about those things. This material is picking up when you're a called person. It's hard to see it. You can probably see it academically, but really experientially, you have to almost be the called person to look at it and go, yeah, I connect with that. I see what they are doing. Okay, let's look at it again and try to pick Genesis elements out of it. With none among the gods who could be considered as equal, that generation of gods would gather together for wild revels. So they proved bothersome to Tiamat. In the Genesis material, we're going to find that names are going to have meanings that are going to indicate qualities. We're going to need to know those if we want to. Those are the analogs, if we want to get that detailed. Their hullabaloo echoed. All this commotion proved unsettling to Tiamat's inner being, and she was bothered by all of their activity within Anderuna. This is the gathering place for the gods, a temple. This is your mind. This is what goes on in your head. There is so much stuff going on in your head at some point. It's unsettling to Tiamat's inner being. Your inner being, yourself. You're bothered by all of this stuff going on in the mind. But there was nothing Apsu could do to mitigate their carousing. There was nothing Tiamat could say to quiet them down, and no matter how troublesome their conduct became to her, regardless of how rowdy things were, she just put up with it. Just imagine your life and times you're sitting there going, oh my God, this is me. My mind is going crazy. I can't sleep. It won't quit. Thoughts won't settle. I can't find peace. It is going crazy. That is what is happening. Well, how does this work in Genesis? Okay, this is where we're going to see more and more. The elements are going to start scattering all over the place, that they're all there, but that they're not. These ones kind of have one kind of a flow to them, a story flow. Genesis is almost like step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. Even though they're containing the same thing, the structuring of them is a bit different. I've said before, and if you recognize the monomyth, you will see that there are monomyth elements that in the Enuma Elish, it did not follow the template. The things were spread all around, but it's okay. You can have first sin and then go procreate, or you can procreate and have things go bad along the way. They're both functional. One of them sounds like it's a very deliberate point-to-point thing, and the other one sounds like as life goes on. I wander like this because I'm learning as I go. Okay, so what we have going on here, actually, this is birds of the air. When you have dominion, when you've been given dominion in Genesis over the birds of the air, that means that you now have the capacity to decide in a way what is going on in your mind, that this mind up here becomes a factor. The thoughts and all that become a factor of your life experiences. This one right here is kind of just getting right to that point where in Genesis you see it's like, well, I've got dominion of birds over the air. How do I do that? What does that mean? I can shoot them and eat them. I can command them. You are given dominion over the analogous idea, metaphorically, that your mind, the thoughts are the birds of the air. And what we're seeing right here is that is what is emerging. The idea that the thoughts, this craziness, you've lost control of what is going on up here. And there's distress over it. So sin is happening at the same time. There's a number of things unfolding here. Power is being created in whatever our character is that's going to be like, yeah, leave me alone. I know what's going on. All of these are coming into play in this beautiful story. The trick is, as you're doing this, it has to fit up here. When you read these, you're making a transition somehow. You read it one way, but it comes out something different. I'm reading Tiamat, and my mind processes early self, King U, my egomaniacal self that knew everything consciously all the time and acted out. Marduk, me now, the one who said, I'm taking it back. I'm wiping you out. I'm wiping out my past. Okay, and you know what? I want to correct something. I realize something now. It's kind of came to me. This does follow the template of the monomyth. It does. It follows the template of the monomyth, but not till a certain point. What is different here is the creation myths. That's where the variation is, just in the creation myth. We're in the creation phase of ourself and our life before we take the trip. Yeah, that's what's happening. And we're getting all the things we need. Here's how the mind works. Here's how the cosmos works. Here's how you came about. Here's how you're a product of things. Here's how all of these things that are these, what are all these weird things? They're all parts of you that are, just look at them. All the times you fight with yourself. All the times you hate yourself. All the times you sit and cry somewhere. All the time you think, why did I do that? The times you say to yourself, I'm done doing that. And then there's another part of you later that's the part that gives in and fails. All of those are going to be in these stories. And I don't know how to describe this. I'm seeing something that I just want to say that sometimes the story reads in such a manner that you have to disconnect from it emotionally, because it can be emotionally reversed if we read it without translating the analogs. Example is the naked thing. You know, you might look at that and go, oh yeah, you don't want to be naked, and you just take that bias with you to the interpretation. You can't. You do want to be naked. So we have to be careful. Sometimes we don't want to kill anything. We don't want to destroy stuff, but we want to destroy what hurts us. There are times we have to make verbal transitions. We have to disconnect from our emotional connection with the words. We have to understand they are analogs. You know what? I'm not satisfied with my progress. How far did we get? 2 pages. I'm not even into the first tablet. Okay. But it was a big setup. You see what I'm doing? I wanted it to kind of be complete. I wanted to, you just jump into this saying things, and people that don't know what you're doing would be like, what are you talking about? You have to explain yourself. There's something different going on. I can go find, I went and look for channels on the monomyth, trying to find other people that are doing anything like this. I find an incredible amount of channels where people are saying this, Joseph Campbell was a nutcase. There's no monomyth. There's no comparisons. There's just a couple of things here and there. They don't see it. When you do, it'll smack you in the head. The harder you look outward, the farther you are from looking at it. It turns inward. It's an analog shift. There's a template. I am born with certain characteristics that are fixed. Outside of that, I can become anything that a human can become. My life experiences dictate that. At first, as a child, I'm happy, joyful, bliss, ignorant of the world. It's a wonderful place to be. But then I begin to learn about life, and it begins to hurt. And I live through my connection with it. Everything that's happening out there in the physical world is what I'm using to become who and what I am. It's a physical experience, but it's becoming mental. Then later on in life, I'm living through that experience, not realizing that. That is creation. Everybody gets to that point. They include other things in creation, that everything cycles, that everything is there's a cause and effect, product of itself, seeds emerging, something cycling. No matter what, it continues to come around. And it comes around of the nature of what it is. You know, an apple grows from an apple seed. Shame grows from a shame seed. I'm going to have to end this video because it just got too long. The material reveals everything that I'm talking about. The monomyth picks up next after that, where we turn inward, we get the material, we gather this stuff up, we go face our demons. We have to go after our Darth Vader, I guess, if we're going to use modern ones. Anyway, I'm going to keep going on this, but I'll be able to, after this video, just jump along quicker and quicker. And it's dynamic. You see, I'm picking at it, going, I got something here. Help me pick at it. That's where I am with it. So, appreciate your patience if you've made it this far. Love one another. I'll see you in the next video.